Does anyone remember the post on the forum Unexplained Coroner's Mysteries in the early 2000s about a girl named Emma Dupont, France? She was shot while in hospital under police custody, but there was no information about why she was shot. I remember reading the article, but I can't find the forum post anywhere. The story stuck in my mind, so I decided to investigate a bit further. What I wasn't expecting was to be led down this really crazy rabbit hole. When a teenage girl disappears, the whole community of Montalban in south of France is thrown into a pit of chaos and disbelief. The young girl, Emma Dupont, had known nothing but pain and sickness her whole life. According to public records, she'd been struggling with the after effects of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, HPS, a viral disease from a young age. Emma wasn't able to play as the other children did, as the virus had affected her lungs, and as such, she needed a lung transplant. She was unable to walk long distances, nor jump around on the playground like those her own age. How does a girl who was as sick as she was just disappear with no trace? The following is what I've been able to piece together with the help of archived internet posts, public records, and even old newspaper clippings. On the 26th of May 2000, the town of Montalban, a sunny, popular tourist destination, was turned into a crime scene. The picturesque little town was built mainly of reddish brick common to the area, and stands on the banks of the Tarn River. The community was a close-knit one, and everyone would help keep an eye over the children as they played. On that fateful day, the children had decided to play on the old bridge near the museum, throwing stones over the edge of the bridge and listening for the plop as they landed in the water. The old bridge was far enough from the houses that no adult could watch over the children that day. A mistake that would haunt everyone in the town for the decades to come. Emma Dupont, age 15 at the time, was particularly cheerful that day, as she would be able to play along with her friends, the bridge being close to her house, and she would be able to walk the distance unaided. The other children soon tired of the game and headed towards home. Emma's closest friend, Charlotte LaRue, was walking slowly with her, but situations like this were really difficult for Emma, and she snapped at Charlotte to go ahead with the group. Charlotte would later say that she stormed off in a fit of her own, tired of Emma's mood swings, and regrets it to this day. At around 6 p.m. on that fateful day, fear grabbed a hold of the community. Emma had left early in the afternoon to play with her friends, which would normally result in her being home earlier than usual due to exhaustion. Even if she had stayed out later than normal, her curfew was 4 o'clock on a school night, and Emma was never late. By 5 o'clock, Mr. and Mrs. Dupont had tried phoning friends and hospitals before phoning for the police. This was a time before Apple Watches and smartphones, and there was no way of tracking Emma using technology like we have today. The police interviewed all the children, and they all agreed that Emma had been in good spirits until it was time to go home. According to Charlotte LaRue, Emma had been deeply affected recently by the fighting between her parents, and possibly a divorce was foremost in her mind. Emma blamed herself and her sickness for the reasons why her parents were fighting. Nothing had been the same since she had returned from the hospital. She also said that due to all the fighting and strain at home, she was reluctant to go home, but she was sure that Emma would have indeed gone home, as there was nowhere else for the girl to go. A massive search party was formed, and the groups of searchers set out in all directions from the old bridge. At 9 o'clock, the search was called off for the night. The police noted that although Mrs. Alice Dupont appeared to be frantic to the point of hysterics, her husband, Mr. Louis Dupont, was stoic and reserved. Although this didn't immediately raise suspicions, it was noteworthy. Early the next morning, the search continued and sniffer dogs were brought in. The searchers spread out to cover as much ground as possible. Because most people didn't yet have cell phones, it was necessary for each searcher to have a whistle to draw attention should Emma be found. The sniffer dogs picked up Emma's scent along the bridge, but the trail ended there. The streets of Montalban were searched and searched again. Garbage bins were tipped over and gone through with a fine-tooth comb. Divers were also brought in to search the River Tarn, fearing that Emma had fallen into the water and was dragged along by the current. They searched up and down the river, but there were no signs of a missing girl. At 9 o'clock, the search was called off again. Hope was slipping through the fingers of those involved. Could a girl who was so sick survive another night outside, somewhere lost in the streets of Montalban or in a bush somewhere along the river? The next morning, the search party was led to cover the botanical gardens and fields nearby. Searchers were now losing hope at finding Emma alive. But they had to find her either way. The botanical gardens was full of bushes and trees, and the search took hours to complete. Again, there was no signs of Emma. No clothing, no shoes, no bag, or even a scrap of her clothing. Nothing. The search through the nearby farmland was also fruitless. Day number 4 was much the same. The radius of the search area grew, but any hope of finding Emma slowly dwindled to a trickle. Mrs. Dupont was inconsolable, and her friends and family gathered around, doing their best to help the family stay strong. However, it appeared that Mr. Dupont was either not reacting or was just being strong for his wife. There were several TV appearances made by Mrs. Dupont begging for the return of Emma, or at least a call to let them know that she was okay. Mr. Dupont was only present for a handful of the interviews. Police began to speculate as to the cause of Mr. Dupont's lack of information and abnormal behavior. Day 5 was heartbreaking. Day 6 was worse. Day 7 began with no hope of finding Emma, and Mrs. Dupont began to prepare herself that Emma was indeed gone forever. The number of searchers had slowly decreased over the days, and now there was only a small number of people left still searching. Many of the searchers returned to the areas that had been previously searched, but now they were looking for clues as to where her body might be. As the sun began to set, there was suddenly a loud shrill sound of a whistle being blown. The entire area went silent. The whistle blew again. Emma had been found. All searchers rushed towards the sound. They got to the riverbank and stopped, all confused. The whistle blew again. The sound was coming from a small island in the river. Everyone was sure that the entire island had been searched more than once. But a searcher came into sight on the edge of the island, along with a gentleman dressed in fishing gear. The police quickly cordoned off the area, and Emma's parents stood on the bank of the river, desperate for news about her. A cheer went up in the crowd. Emma was alive, but unconscious. A paramedic team was dispatched to the area urgently, and Emma was taken to the nearest hospital, Hospital de Montalban. Everyone from the town was anxious to see the girl, and there was a large group of people at the entrance to the hospital when the ambulance arrived. Police were needed to move the onlookers back and make way for the ambulance crew, Emma and her parents. It was late at night when the parents released a press statement. Emma was still alive, but still unconscious. However, inside the hospital, a deeper concern were the cuts into her chest and abdomen. The cuts were long and made with a very sharp instrument. The incisions were made with almost perfect precision, and doctors agreed that it would have been someone with a reasonable knowledge of medicine to be able to make the cuts. What was even stranger was that the cuts were stitched close again, and once again, doctors stated that this would have been done by someone with a greater knowledge. What was apparent, though, was that the person or persons who had done this were using outdated equipment. where dissolvable stitches were now used for most procedures inside the body. These had been done with the type of stitches that hadn't been used in decades. The type of stitch used was also antiquated. A news crew snuck in a hidden camera within a handbag of a nurse into the hospital. The footage taken was concerning. Emma lay in the hospital bed. Her skin was white as snow, and her breathing was labored. She had electrodes attached to her chest, and machines all around her beeping in rhythm. Her parents were standing on either side of the bed, screaming at each other, blaming each other for what had happened. At the entrance of the room were 2 policemen. It's possible that the authorities were worried that the person who had done this to Emma would come back to finish her off. The whole town held its breath, waiting for Emma to wake up and identify her assailant or assailants who had done this to her. No one reported any strangers in the area at the time, and the suspicions of each other's neighbors and friends were gnawing at the town. An answer was needed, and soon. What happened next was only vaguely documented by the police. Emma's parents had been screaming at each other again, one on either side of the bed. The officers outside the room popped their heads into the door and suggested that they take the argument outside to not upset Emma, as she could wake up at any moment. Officer Monet later said in a statement that Emma started to slowly open her eyes and her parents gasped in happiness. He closed the door so as to afford some privacy and went to find a doctor to inform him of the development, so that Emma could get the treatment needed. Suddenly, there was a gut-wrenching scream of pain from Emma's room. It was high-pitched and sounded unearthly. Seconds later came another scream, but this one was higher in volume and lower in pitch. The police rushed to the room and broke down the door that refused to open. Gunshots rang out and brought the whole hospital to a standstill. Officer Monet would later describe in his statement that Emma was covered in blood and stood over the bodies of her parents. She lunged forward at the officer, and he had only seconds to pull out his gun and fire at her before she reached him. A bullet struck her directly between the eyes, and all life was extinguished. I've looked online for more information about the event, but there is only a very vague statement from the police officer. The article I did find that led me down this rabbit hole was the coroner's report. Unfortunately, it has been deleted since, so this is what I do remember from it. Although the bullet had stopped her at the hospital, her body had been dead days before she was found. We don't know for sure what signs there were or weren't when she was being monitored at the hospital, but something must have been amiss. When the coroner opened up Emma's abdomen, her organs were in all the wrong places. I don't mean slightly moved. I mean her lungs were in her pelvic region, and her spleen was above her heart. Everything had been carefully removed and put back in the wrong place. My first thought when I learned this was that it was a Jack the Ripper copycat. But he didn't put his victims' organs back into the bodies. The care and precision that was taken to move around the organs must have been extraordinary to have Emma wake up and move again. How long she could have continued to live, we cannot even begin to fathom, because we don't even know how she lived at all. The most frustrating piece of information that I would have liked to research more was that her lungs, although in the wrong place, were perfectly healthy, and there was no sign of lung damage that she had suffered. The forum post ID was 049 on the form. I'm not sure why that number stuck with me for all these years, but it has. If you have a copy of the original post or an archive link for it, please let me know. With all this information out there for people to go through, there are several theories on the internet as to what happened. I'm not ruling out a serial killer version, as it is possible, considering the number of missing persons in France that year and sightings of a man in a bird-like mask in those areas. Some people on the internet have laid out that it was an alien abduction that was covered up by a shadowy organization, and that the aliens were experimenting on Emma. But I don't share those beliefs. There must be more of a human cause for what happened, but as of this video, there is no official cause. Although, on an interesting side note, the police officers that were there that day, as well as the coroner and some of the hospital staff, have either died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances since the incident. I could not find anyone there that day who witnessed the incident, its aftermath, or the autopsy to interview for this video. With the strangeness of this video, you can see why it is stuck in my mind for all these years. If you have any ideas as to the possible cause behind Emma's death and apparent reanimation, leave a comment down below. Also, if you have any information about the disappearance and deaths of all of those involved that day, again, please let me know in the comments. This is Secrecy, Crimes, and Paranormal, signing out.